Welcome to Ham and Jam, the World War II British Airborne podcast, hosted by Andy Bryant and Kevin Getz.
Afterwards, we discovered we just skimmed the clip top, passing through a high-tension electrical cable and smashing through a big stone wall. 3 or 4 of the border men had been injured, and Sergeant Cherry just put them in the shelter part of the starboard wing. Dick had a green fracture of the left thigh bone, whilst my left foot was broken in half, and I had injuries to my chest and throat where I had gone through the front of the glider. Dick and I were just put to the port side of the wreckage. When the injured were settled, Sergeant Cherry took his half-dozen fit men to try and link up with the main force of the 1st Airlanding Brigade. But after an hour or so, they returned as they could not find anybody. And that, listeners, was Staff Sergeant Ken Taff Evans of the Glider Pilot Regiment, an excerpt taken from Glider Pilots in Sicily. I cannot do this without my co-host, Andy. Andy, how you doing, buddy?
Yeah, I'm doing good, mate. And we should probably mention that was written by Mike Peters. Mike, it is great to have you back on the podcast.
It's really good to be back.
As always in our virtual pub, we're having a drink. Mike, you're our guest. What are you having?
So far, on my previous 2 visits, I've been on Verona because it's been Italian. Although we're still talking to the Italian battlefield, I've decided to go for a little bit more appropriate, which is a Brewdog Wingman with the Blue Eagle on it.
A Blue Eagle too. Nothing army air called there at all, is it?
Yeah. Andy, I would ask you what you're drinking, but
so yeah, I'm gonna be supping a Guinness as usual. I hate to disappoint.
Why start now? I mean, you do disappoint me every once in a while, but
that's something completely different.
Gentlemen, I'm going with a wine and stuff and lager, something completely off the wall.
Yeah, what's happened to your Belgian blonde there? That's one of your favourite tipples.
You know what? Normally I do go with the Belgian blonde, but I'm all out. So cheers. Mike, we had you on to discuss Operation Beggar, commonly referred to as Turkey Buzzard. Before we really get into Ladbroke, what I'd like to do is set the scene where we are now with regards to the Glider Pilot Regiment and the 1st Airlanding Brigade.
If we look back to January 1942, North Africa is over, El Alamein has happened, the first victory. The US forces have landed on Operation Torch in Tunisia, and the Brits have come through from Egypt all the way across Libya, and then so North Africa is now clear. And as Alexander says, the Union flag is flying out on the North African coast. So the question is now what to do next. And there's a big debate in January 1942 in Casablanca between Roosevelt and Churchill and all of their commanders as to what is the next logical thing to do. And the US want a very direct, robust, should do Operation Roundup. They want to go to UK and just cross the channel and just go straight for Berlin. Route 1. Churchill very, very wary and very nervous of this. We're not ready for that yet. We don't have A, we don't even have the landing craft. B, the Germans are still too strong. And amphibious landing is the most difficult thing to do. We've got all our forces here. We can't sit and wait. We can't hand because we've got Stalin pressuring us on the Eastern Front saying, what are you guys doing? You've cleared North Africa. Now what? You're going to need to do. So the question is it going to be Northwest Europe straight away? Or are they going to do something else? And something else would be Italy or Sardinia or southern France or Greece or wherever. There's all this big debate, and Churchill has this fixation on the soft underbelly of Europe, going up to the boot of Italy, hopping from taking Sicily, taking Italy, knocking Italy out of the war, taking Rhodes and taking an Axis capital as a big psychological blow to the Axis forces, or something. And there's a big debate. And of course, this is where the Germany first argument wins through, and round-the-clock bombing is agreed as well. Lots happens at Casablanca. And the Brits still think they're in charge of the war. And the Americans are really already in charge of the war at this point. But Churchill's still got a lot of clout. So he manages to convince Roosevelt and Admiral King and Marshall and all the biggest senior American commanders by outmaneuvering them, really. It's Italy next, and we're going to do Sicily first. Of course, there's the man who never was, deception plan, and all these other things that come. But really, it's got to be that we're going to hop across from North Africa. All our deception plans, we're going to land in Sicily, take Sicily, then take Italy, and that will knock Mussolini and Italy out of the war. And then we'll have the Foggia airfield in southern Italy, and we'll be able to, from there, we'll be able to hit the two oil fields in Romania, we'll be able to hit Bavaria, be able to hit southern German factories and industrial plants, etc., and bomb from both sides of Europe. That's in very simplistic terms, what the decision is. Mm-hmm. So Sicily is agreed on, and what will become Operation Husky begins to be formulated in Casablanca.
Is this also a case of in terms of the 1st Airlanding Brigade? Okay, it's been formed. We're waiting for a mission. Are we seeing guys like, okay, we're here, put us in the game, coach?
It's not even, I don't think they're even that far. If you think about what's happened before in North Africa, there's been a few battalion parachute drops. Glider-wise, there's been Freshman, which is a complete and utter disaster in November 42. And the glider pilot regiment is formed in February officially. Parachute regiment is formed in August. So yeah, there is an airborne division commanded by one Boy Browning, but there's no definitive understanding of what to do with it. And it's less than a year old. From February 42 to January 43 is less than a year. They've had all those growing pains where there weren't enough transport aircraft, not enough instructors, not enough aircraft, no places to put them, all of that. So it's still very much in its infancy. And what we'll see is Husky is a progression, an attempt to progress battalion-sized operations to brigade-sized operations, using the division in brigade groups. So we're going to try and up the ante. And don't forget, the US is coming down the track as well. It's 82nd Airborne will also jump without their gliders to Sicily. But the US Airborne will also be committed for the first time. So this is the first time we're going to try. So I think I said it on the Beggar or the Varsity podcast about the Germans are coming down the track the other way saying, yeah, that airborne stuff, forget it. It doesn't work. And we're coming right the other way from 1942 into 43 saying, right, this is great. We're going to have air supremacy. We're going to do this. So we're going to use our gliders and we're going to use our paratroopers, etc. So both the US and the UK are both fixed on using airborne forces.
Well, who or what is the driving force behind using the Allied Airborne Forces for Husky?
Browning's there. Browning is in North Africa with the Airborne Division because he's going to hand over further downstream before it happens. But he's there at the flying stage and he's championing the use of airborne forces. Montgomery, before Husky, will visit the Airlanding Brigade and welcome them to the 8th Army in July, just before the week before they go. He'll say, not really, quote unquote, I've not really understood the use of airborne forces. We've not made the most of them. We're going to rectify it now. We're going to use them. And all the time from January 43 through to July 43, the Husky is being planned and Ladbroke is being planned and all these other operations. There's this debate went on in the German military 2 years before. Do we use these airborne forces in small numbers or do we use them as a brigade, divisional size groups? Are they a large scale weapon or are they special forces as such? And that debate is going on right through the spring of 1943 in North Africa is what to do because they've used them as small groups on the drops they tried in Tunisia, etc., battalion groups, but not really how British airborne hierarchy and commanders see them being used. They see them in elite brigade groups and more. And if you think about when we talked about Varsity 3 years downstream, it's like airborne corps being dropped together. So we're right back at the start. So catch questions were all poised because it's like, what are they thinking? At this time, they want the big one. And the people who are pulling around this don't the idea because he needs some way. He's done the desert war route. This is the first amphibious operation they've done. And Sicily is thought to be a fortress. And at the end of North Africa, the Italians fought very well. The Germans bailed out and the Italian troops that stayed there fought hard. So he's expected them to fight equally hard in Sicily. So he's like, he wants every tool in the box, every special forces, special raiding squadron, parachute regiment, all these different units. He wants to use them all. And he knows that on paper, Mussolini is building coastal defense batteries and all kinds of different things around Sicily. So they need to be able to find a way to breach those defenses. And airborne forces offers another option. The answer to your question is there's a big pressure to use airborne forces, and airborne forces are there saying, use us, we want to prove ourselves. So there's a group thing going on there. This is our time.
Because from Chatterton's standpoint, reading from the wings of Pegasus, I thought it was interesting. He said after he was ordered to North Africa under Hopkinson, I knew that headquarters had no idea what they were driving up to as far as the glider pilot regiment was concerned. But no effort of mine succeeded in bringing even a glimmer of light into their darkness. There was indeed a great gulf between those in authority and myself as to what our proper role in battle.
I think that's what I'm driving at and that's what's driven out on the previous podcast is because we look with hindsight. We go, okay, there's that 3 year window from 42 to 45. Airborne forces works and it's used. And we think that's it. It was always that way. But these guys started with a clean sheet of paper. And we've gone through that chronology of Freshman, Sicily, south of France, into Ireland, and then on to Varsity. And of course, all the other airborne stuff in the Pacific and everywhere else. It's a really steep learning curve. If you put the German curve next to that, the low countries. Their failed operations at the Hague, even Amal, did really well. All these different things they do, and then create a Pyrrhic victory with disaster. You see, it's a really small window of opportunity that airborne forces has each day. It's a short day compared to other stuff like the tank and artillery and everything else called the helicopters today, whatever. It's a small window. How do you grow that experience? People like Browning, Lathbury, Frost, who we talk about all the time. What do they know? You've only got to look at some of the tug pilots who fly on Beggar, Turkey Buzzard, and this. They're in 38 wing, and they're the first time they've done all this. Modifying the aircraft for the first time to do it. This is completely new, and I think that gets lost in translation sometimes. People think, oh yeah, Red Berets, and they parachuted. Germans did it, and even Amel, that was it. Everyone was doing it. Not really. There's an element of danger and chance of all of this all the time. And I always say about airborne forces being glass half full, but the risks are phenomenal.
So, okay, obviously we spoke in the last episode about Turkey Buzzard, Beggar. We've got the horses out in North Africa now. What is the airborne plan, or the British airborne plan now, for their role in Husky?
So they come up with 3 brigade operations. So they're not going to drop as a division. So there's Ladbroke, which is taking Syracuse and the Ponte Grande Bridge and the port of Syracuse. There's Glutton, which is capturing Augusta, the port of Augusta. And there's Fustion, which is Primosole Bridge. They're all linked by a highway, Highway 115, which goes along across the Catania Plain, north to south. When you go there, as you can see, it's like the Leary Valley, and there's Highway 6 at Monte Cassino, or maybe it's like Route Club going from Nijmegen up to Arnhem. It's a highway linked by bridges, which armour has got to advance across from south to north, and those bridges need to be captured by airborne forces. And then there's a big debate, because at the start of all this planning cycle, Hopkinson is not a divisional commander. Browning is still. He's about to go back to UK to form 6th Airborne Division and to take over overall charge of all airborne forces. And Browning is quite sceptical. See, Browning gets a bad press, you see, but Browning is quite sceptical about whether Syracuse is the right place to use gliders. It's low stone walls, and it's, all these orange groves and lemon groves, and it's too close to the sea, not the right place to use gliders. But he challenged, not openly, but challenged by Hopkinson, who's the new GOC. He's going to take over from Browning, and he's learned to fly gliders, as has Browning. Chatterton taught Browning to fly gliders, and Hopkinson wears his pilots when he's a civilian glider pilot, and he's chomping at the bit to be the first person to use gliders on a meaningful scale. Freshman's failed 32 gliders, but he's like, okay, we're going to get the first Airlanding Brigade. I'm going to fly a glider on it. He's going to fly on it. And if you want a divisive character, we talk about Rock and Chatterton. Have a look at Hopkinson, because there's different views on Hopkinson as well. And Hopkinson is determined to use gliders, so he says, right, tells Browning this he avoids Browning around North Africa until Browning goes back to UK. And Hopkinson says, right, okay, this is my plan, and tells the chain of command, tells 8th Army and everywhere else, okay, we're going to do this, and we're going to use 1st Airlanding Brigade. They will do Operation Ladbroke, Syracuse. 1 para brigade will do Fustion. 2 parachute brigade will do Glutton. So a glider op and 2 parachute ops, which will allow, they haven't got enough lift, enough transport aircraft to do all 3 at once. The resonant theme there.
We've heard that before.
So you're going to have to use mainly American lift to do it. 51st Troop Carrier wing, you're not very experienced, and it's asking a lot of these American pilots to do what they're going to be asked to do. So we can do a brigade at a time. So that's how it starts to gestate.
So we've got a few hundred pilots from the Glider Pilot Regiment out there now. They're coming up short on gliders, though. So where are you going to get these other gliders from?
Well, that's the problem, because even before the pilots leave UK, go from Salisbury Plain up to Scotland and come down by sea, there are no gliders in North Africa. So as they go through this whole planning cycle, how are we going to do this, and start to wargame it, it's like, well, then they start talking to their wonderful allies, the Americans, who say, hey, we've got some created CG-4 gliders in West Africa, and Crete's about 50 odd of them, and more on the way. So we can get them moved across to Africa for you guys, and you can then fly them. And that they do. They ship them across around to Morocco, the guys, and as the pilots arrive, they find 2 black American fitters, because Americans are still doing segregation. Jim Crow and all that is still happening at that time, and the manuals. And then they're told, okay, these big, huge crates here have got gliders in them. You just need to build them and then test fly them. And then the Americans also fly one over there. It's Sam Fine, the pilot, who flies over there. Army Air Force glider pilot gets towed over there. He flies over there. He begins a trainer program. From 8th of May, they start. And within 10 days, they'd built 50. So
That's pretty good going.
because they're sub-assemblies, they fit them together and got the manuals and the fitters to do it. And they started to test fly them. Yeah. And they're living in the crates. I think I'll put it in glider pilots in Sicily. All the guys who I spoke to who were involved in this all remembered on these Dust Bowl airfields in the boxes and not being able to work because it was so hot during the height of the day, working really early in the morning, working really in the late afternoon, and then withdrawing back into these boxes and then building these things. So you're going to fly a glider you've never seen, but you've got to build it first. And there are problems with assembling them because the bracing, the special tools to brace the wires of the wings and the tail, etc. It's got steel cables, bracing, and needs to be torqued to a certain torque, etc. So there are problems with doing that. They are grounded for a while. So there are 6 glider pilot regiment officers and 62 CRTOs be the workforce. Build these guys, and some of them haven't flown months. They've passed their pilots courses in the UK, and there've been no gliders or no transport aircraft, no tugs to pull them. So they're not going to fly a completely alien glider, haven't flown. And then they had the whole thing of moving covertly, having their wings up, not wearing their berets, taking their rank off because they were moved under secrecy to look like infantry private soldiers. They're pretty unhappy. So, yeah.
We have the meeting, Hopkinson and Chatterton, and I'm going to read this again, an excerpt from his book. And Chatterton writes, he has this meeting. It says, "Now look here, Colonel Chatterton, I'm going to leave you for half an hour. And in that time, you can study the photographs. If at the end of that time, you still think this is too difficult, you can consider yourself relieved of your command." I want to get your thoughts on this idea of a symbolic resignation or Chatterton saying, okay, I got to make do with the best that I got because I've got my guys I have to protect. Because he has to know in the back of his head, okay, yeah, I resign, go back to the UK. There's somebody waiting in the wings right behind me.
When I researched this, everywhere you go, you hear lots of hearsay. I heard lots of hearsay from glider pilots, quite senior glider pilots at the time. I've been talking to them 20 years ago. I was talking to them about this. I never got to meet Chatterton. Nobody ever got to ask Hopkinson. We've only got one side of this story. So I'm always very, very wary. Even when I put it in the book as a caveat, we don't know Hopkinson's side of this story. We only know what Chatterton said afterwards in his book and at every association meeting after the war. And there's no reason to doubt that, but there's a reason to doubt that. Where's the evidence? If you put yourself in that situation, what would you do? You could walk away, and Chatterton's got so much invested in. Rock's gone. He's it. If he walks away and it fails, it's the end of glider pilot regiment. That's the end of gliders in the British Army. There's more at stake than this, than the very important casualties that might happen, but also there's actually the glider pilot capability in the Army, which Chatterton obviously believes in beyond this operation. He flies in the Beaufighter, doesn't see the landing zones. He sees the photographs, sees the maps. He says it's not suitable for gliders. And, when you go there, you look at the 2 different areas, Fustian and Ladbroke areas. If you were going to do it, you should do it the other way around. Drop paratroopers in the Ladbroke area and put gliders up in the Fustian area. You can only assume that Hopkinson wanted to use them first. He was going to fly in the glider, or there's something we don't know about. And I find that this a lot over the years. There weren't going to be any transport aircraft on the dates he wanted them for, or there weren't enough, or 38. These variables that go on in the background that nobody talks about. I think Chatterton did the right thing. That's the accepted narrative, to stay and lead, try and influence it as best he could. And hindsight says he did the right thing.
Mike, Andy, and I talked about this when we were in our Browning episode, and we were discussing who is the stronger zealot for airborne. Is it Browning or is it Hopkinson?
Who's got the most influence? So you can shout loudest, but Hopkinson is that kind of guy. He's quite proactive. But who moves around the corridors of power and knows how to do it? Mm-hmm. Browning. He's an educated, guards, DSO, all the rest of it. So which buttons to press. He talks the language to the likes of Alexander and people like at the highest level, Montgomery. He's a better politician. And, at that level, I think a commander needs to be as much a politician as they do an actual soldier. So if you look at, they've all got different varying levels of that. Montgomery's a thespian. He can stand on his Jeep and do his, gather around, blah, blah, and he's a very good soldier, very deliberate planner, etc. He's not great with people, but he knows which people he can work. So they've all got those human frailties. And he's the great ambassador for airborne forces. Yeah, I think at that time, 1942, 43, it's Browning. Because, Hopkinson, eating our own sandwiches too early, a failure is not a great advert for airborne forces. And Browning doesn't want to fail. He's very aware of the frailties of airborne forces. Maybe he's not so aware of September 44, but
They actually had some instances of sabotage, didn't they, before they actually left? Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
There's a couple of incidents. One is an American ground crew, an Italian-American, who's caught cutting the cable between the gliders and the tugs from 51st Troop Carrier Command. He's chopping the telephone cable so that they can't talk to each other. And when he's asked what he's doing, why he's doing it, he says, well, it's my home country and I don't want it invaded. So, there's a few of that kind of thing going on.
Is there a huge explosion as well?
Yeah, on the 6th of July. So the 1st of July, they get the orders. 2nd and 3rd of July, they start to diffuse those orders down the ranks. So they get their orders and they then understand it about Waterloo and Putney and North Force and South Force and the different landing zones, etc. But by the 5th of July, the borders are really struggling to get the right equipment. So they need flamethrowers and barbed wire and all kinds of bits. And there's a bit of a supply problem. That gets worse. The 6th of July, when the Airborne Division supply dump catches fire and all the ammunition blows and all of the glider pilots' personal kit gets burnt. All their kit bags, so when you live in a tent, you have your main stuff in a kit bag, separate bulk store, that's all gone. And there's a shortage of ammunition. So they spend the 7th and 8th of July, the QM spend running around trying to replenish ammunition and stuff that's gone missing, etc. So, but the thing about 6th of July is that fire takes everybody. They all have to go and fight the fire, sort the cat. So any rehearsals and orders and preparation is stopped to sort this fire out because it's such a big fire. On the 7th of July, they move to the airfields, the departure airfields. And then on the 8th of July, Montgomery and Browning turn up and visit the two Airlanding battalion groups and all the pilots, etc. And then they start to load the gliders. On the morning of the 9th of July, there's a church service. And in the afternoon, it's the final packing of gliders and checking of gliders, etc. And that's when the Met forecast comes in on the 9th of July, is that there's 48 kilometres an hour winds, which means Chatterton makes the decision to increase that release height and to go closer, as close as he can. But that decision is taken too late to be transmitted to all the airfields. And the people who need that information are the American tug crews.
So they're getting ready to head off. They're leaving North Africa. They're heading towards Sicily. How big of a factor is this going to play in the end result?
So the two critical things are it's a night operation and it's over water. So you need to be able to fix your horizon and you need to be able to maintain a height, be aware of that. So base is really important. You don't want to be in clouds. And if you're flying 500 feet or below, the margin for error is much, much reduced. Second thing is you need moonlight for any airborne drop in World War II to see where you're going, to see where you're landing and to see the surface of the water. And of course, the big variable that comes into play, basically, they fly from North Africa on the 9th of July, 43. When you investigate an aircraft crash or whatever, you're going to look at the chain of events that lead up to it. If you can humour me for a minute, we'll just go back a bit. The operation order for Ladbroke is issued on the 1st of July. The two Airlanding battalions get their orders, what they're actually going to do on the 1st of July, as do the glider pilot regiment, etc. Everyone knows, that goes down to company level and starts being percolating down through the different layers of command so people know what's expected of them. That means that by the time they go, they've had 3 weeks training. That means 144 gliders, 144 glider crews that are going to fly. Between them, they've had 1,363 flights using the gliders. It's not a lot. Hardly any of it's at night and none of it's over water. Got to come back to the fact that the tug pilots are as inexperienced. And the aircraft they're flying, definitely short of navigators. The US Troop Transport Command is new and they can't find enough navigators. So, you've got them flying these. Our glider tugs fly in the street because we've got so many different types of aircraft, different engine performances. You can't fly in a formation. So they fly differently. You fly in a stream and you just get there. But you've got to navigate it. We've been in the war longer and the RAF have navigation all aircraft, so that's fine. But the Americans have to fly in these Vs. And in some cases, only one aircraft in the V of 9 has a navigator. They have no self-sealing fuel tanks, no armor plating. These are civilian DC-3s painted green. Because the C-47, as we understand it, the RAF C-47 isn't there yet. So there's concern in Troop Carrier Command about if these guys get hit by flak, they're going to catch fire and go down. And we can't afford to lose them and all that. And they'll go down with the glider. They're told, you're going to stay 3 kilometers offshore, out of the threat band, cast the gliders off there. So there you got a constraint straight away. They're not allowed to fly over Sicily, not allowed to cross the coastline. So their plan is to take off from North Africa, fly out to Malta. When they get to Malta, over the Malta airfield, RAF Malta will put up 2 crossed searchlights. And then you turn northwest, turn up towards Sicily. So you fly across from North Africa, hit Malta, bank over Malta, and you head and you fly parallel to that eastern coast of Sicily. The tugs will fly parallel to the coast. The gliders will peel off and fly inshore inland. That's the plan. It's a good plan on a good day. If everything goes right, it's planned. The problem is that these guys have got no navigators. They've got all kinds of problems on the night. On the night, there's a strong headwind. And the controversy that comes around this whole thing where there's some Anglo-US finger pointing that goes on, or worse, is that the blame gets pointed at the Americans, and the Americans say, no, it wasn't us. But it's not us fault. The problem is there's no communication on the airfield. When this higher wind speed is reported, which means that you need to fly when you cast off, you need to be cast off at a higher height, and you need to be closer. So that needs to be communicated to the tug pilot. You are allowed to fly closer. So that isn't communicated. And there's a big debate about why that happens or why it doesn't happen, etc. So essentially what we end up then with is there are 8 hawsers with 7 Halifax and 1 Alderweireld towing them, flying the coup de marche for Putney and Waterloo, which is the railway bridge at Syracuse, and the Ponte Grande Bridge at Syracuse. There are 144 wackos with being towed by American tugs, and there are all kinds of problems. So Chatterton says originally that they should be cast off 2,750 metres offshore, 550 metres. So if we look at the original orders, they were going to be cast off at 3,000 feet. Before they go, that's bumped up to 4,000 feet. And actually, when the coup de marche goes and Tommy Grant amends the coup de marche plan, he casts off Galpin and Brown at 5,000 feet to give them more reach to get in. Because the glider obviously has got no engine, it needs some more reach to allow for the headwind. The increased headwind has been reported, and they pick it up as they turn over Malta. That's when it hits them. They're flying into this headwind. So you've got 1,730 airborne troops being carried in these gliders. And they're spread across 144 gliders. And it's in a stream, what should be a really ordered formation, it starts to break up and starts to be separated and starts to separate until we end up with 326 airborne troops in the water because the gliders fall short. Of the 144, 56 gliders will make landfall. And some of those, if you've seen the photographs, are literally balanced on the cliff edge that just made landfall. So, and the controversy is, why didn't they know? Why wasn't it corrected, etc.? Why did some make it? Why didn't some make it? I think when you read the accounts, these airfields are pretty austere. Communication is very poor, lack of telephone lines. Once they're in the air, they're on radio silence. The lack of experience. And if we look at let's switch across to the hawsers who have got these RAF crews. Galpin and Brown carrying 15 platoon, commanded by Lieutenant Len Withers in a hawser. And the hawsers are carrying 30 men each, which is a lot for a hawser. They set off initially, and Grant is an experienced test pilot from Boscombe Down. So he's a British test pilot, so he knows his stuff. Although quite new to the Halifax, he's roped in at the start by Peter Wilkinson, 295 squadron. Wilkinson is the surviving pilot from Freshman. So he and Grant will be the guys involved in training the crews for Pegasus Bridge and Hawser Bridge. So these are the caliber of the guys I'm talking about. And as he takes off, he has all kinds of problems with one of his starboard engines, which basically means that a Mark V Halifax, where it's configured with fuel, etc., it can't really fly on 3 engines. It's too heavy. He says, right, well, we're going to have to turn back. So that glider, which is one of the 4 gliders sent out for Ponte Grande, they turn back. As they get back to North Africa and start to see the flare path of the airfield, everything rights itself. The engine starts working. Number 3 engine comes back online. Grant says to Galpin, talk to Withers, we'll go. We're about 15 minutes behind everybody else, but we'll go. They turn around and set off back out to sea into the darkness towards Malta. On the way, the autopilot fails and the dead reckoning compass fails, which is exactly what you need to navigate at night over water. But, and it's a big but compared to the DC-3s, these guys have got a trained navigator on board, a really good navigator. So they carry on. And as they get to the coast, the navigator is doing drift calculations and says, hey, the headwind's increased. Talk to Grant, and Grant says, right, okay, we can't drop them off offshore now. I'm going to fly them 2.5 k's closer inland. So he flies them right up to the coast, almost to Syracuse, before he says to Galpin, now is your time. And he's told Galpin before they set off, these are the recognition points. Point A, B, C, D. Point Delta is where you should cast off and go. And Galpin sees point Delta, releases, twists away, and Grant sets off back to nurses, good old Halifax, back to North Africa, which he does without incident.
Is it true that the tail gunner on at Halifax is engaging the searchlights?
Yes. Yeah. So that's what the account says. Yeah. Well, you've got to be careful. Again, huge pinch of salt into these. The tail gunner can't fire if the aircraft is in a high tone.
Mike, the glider pilots, they're used to the Horsa. They've been through this regimented training program. When you spoke with them, what were their thoughts of flying the Hadrian versus the Horsa, especially knowing that Horsa has those big barn door flaps and you can get down fast. And now you're in a glider where, okay, we're going to have a long glide path before we hit the ground.
Most people I spoke to, and I spoke to a few American glider pilots as well, they loved the Waco. They absolutely loved the Hadrian. They thought it's a bit like iPhone versus Apple. That's what you grew up with. That's what you're used to. But and most of the guys that flew the Horsa said to you, great aircraft, you had to fly it. It was much better, and for all different reasons. And most of them who did go onto the Hadrian said, no, want to go back to the Horsa, don't like it. But I did meet some of the guys who flew in the Independent Squadron, who flew in the Mediterranean on the resistance resupply operations. So loved the Waco. Well, it was great, ideal for the job. Small special forces jobs like that, they thought it was a great aircraft, easy to fly, nice and light and small. But most of them said, no, I'm quite happy with my Horsa. Thank you very much. It flies better. It gets down. I like the brakes.
The big advantage of the Horsa is you can carry a Jeep and a gun in the same glider.
Well, that comes home to roost on this operation. And that's why, as we talked about on Beggar, that's why Beggar happens, because they've got to be able to land Jeep and the gun together. And that's which the Horsa can do, or complete airborne platoon together. Because even with two Wacos, you're going to split a platoon. An airborne platoon being 28, 30 people, you're going to have to split them 13 or 15 in each Hadrian. Or you can put them all in one Horsa, because the Horsa is built around that unit of currency, the platoon.
At this point, the whole idea of double towing the Wacos. I mean, I know the Americans did that later on, didn't they? But
that was the original concept. But don't get the luxury. The only thing I can think of is because it's simpler to fly, you can train more pilots. Because to fly a Horsa, you have to go and do a proper RF pilot's course, then learn to fly a glider. And it's a big old beast. Whereas to fly a small glider, it's simpler. I wouldn't say it's easy.
Mike, we've been released. The gliders are coming down. What are we looking at as far as landing zones? What type of terrain these guys going to be facing?
I've walked these landing zones, and you've cleared the water. Assuming you've cleared the water. Now you are talking. It's not even flat. It's quite hilly, and all the farm boundaries and field boundaries are low stone walls, probably about 4 or 5 bricks high, probably up to your knee, or maybe a little bit higher in some places. And they are groves are full of lime trees and lemon trees. Or big thorn bushes and ditches. It's the last place on earth you would fly a glider, land a glider. And every time I walk, I shake my head. I think I must have been there at least a dozen times. And every time I go, I think, what possessed anybody to think that you could land a glider in this? Because, when you look at the injuries, there's, so when they take off the road, 144, 7 are lost through broken tow ropes, turn back, etc. And then you, One glider goes down in Malta, one goes back to North Africa, all those things we talked about, and then you got 56 reached Sicily of the 144, including one Jim Warwork. Of those 56, 12 of them are within a tactical bound of their landing zone. The rest are miles away, some of them dozens of miles away, and 73 are in the sea. You're in the sea in your full combat kit.
I am going to go there. SAS Rogue Heroes. Season 2. Sorry, Kev. Sorry, I know you're just about to bring up your beer. 1, did the SAS know that they were going to be fighting Wacos in the Mediterranean on the way in? And 2, did they just ignore the guys in the water and just hit the beach?
So, second question, that did happen. Landing craft did go past people in the water. Landing craft on the way back out, some stopped and picked people up. But the landing craft commanders were told not to stop. So there's an element of truth in that.
But did they know that they were going to be in the water? I mean, surely they didn't know that they were going to be coming across all those Wacos in the drink.
No. Right. Never let the truth get away of a good story.
Well,
So what ends up happening to our good friend George Chatterton and Pip Hicks?
Hicks is in the water. Hicks is in the water and swims ashore. And I think going back to right at the start of the podcast, when we talked about what shapes people's experience and then the view of like the way they do stuff. If you're Chatterton, Hopkinson, all these people, you've seen Norway go so horribly wrong, and you've seen the trials and things, and then you see this. And then you're asked to do In the Dark, and then you're asked to do Arnhem. You've got to take some baggage with you and think about, okay, well, how do we do this better? You would think. So Chatterton gets ashore. There's lots of these high-ranking officers who are floating around as section commanders and reported to battles. This the classic airborne scenario. Everything's gone wrong. When we get to the Battle of Ponte Grande. In the morning, there's 80 people there holding it.
We did touch on Galpin and his glider. But obviously, you got Len Withers. Now, what's the story with that? I mean, that's a heck of a story. As I say, you talk about the Pegasus Bridge coup de main, but
it isn't. Yeah, big thumbs up to Tommy Grab who gets them there. As Galpin and Brown are taking their final turn, been taken on by an Italian searchlight locked onto them and quite aggressive Italian aircraft fire, and they managed to shake the searchlight and they end up heading back out to sea in the dark. And then Galpin turns around again because he's losing high. Obviously, he's gone down from 4,000 to 3,000. He's picked up by the searchlight, he's at 3,000, then he turns out again. He comes back. As he turns back in over the coast again, he's now down to 1,500 feet. He sees the opening of the canal. As he turns down, he's under fire again. This time it's machine gun fire. And when they get down on the ground later, they'll find 30 bullet holes in the glider. So the Italians were giving it some. They were giving it a go. But luckily for them, searchlights, when they calibrate as to where they should be, they have a bearing from a point on the ground. What they do, they bring the searchlight down to the ground and they line it up. The Italians did that. They illuminated the bridge. And so Galpin could see where the bridge was. And he knew, him and Brown, that once they'd picked up the canal, they turned over the canal of the mouth, and they were at 1,000 feet. But they were going to make it. They had enough lift to get along the canal to get to landing zone 3 south, which is where they were going, which is a very rough pasture next to the canal. And when you walk it, you can see, this would work. Bumpy, but it would work. And the machine gun fire carries on. So then Galpin dives to shake off the machine gun and get down faster, puts those big flaps on, comes into a skinny hole, a landing, not a crash. And then he loses his nose wheel, and the friction of the nose going along the pasture slows him down, the flaps, the brakes, etc., and stops. As they stop, Chuck and Galpin and Brown talk about they got out to see where they were, thinking, well, we're 15 minutes behind everybody else. Where are the other 3 horses? There's no one here. What I didn't know is one gone down 1.5 miles away, one's gone down 6 miles away, and in comes another horse, and they realise by the chalk number, it's the company commander, fantastic. And Len Withers is like, oh, can't go for that, I'm not in charge anymore. And he comes to see the OC. As they come in, that takes fire. Anyway, whatever happens, the Bangalore torpedoes under the seats in that passenger compartment explode. Whole aircraft blows up just above the ground and collapses onto the ground. And there are 3 badly burned survivors afterwards, but everyone else is killed out of the T+2 crew. So imagine that happening to you. So there are no other gliders. So then Withers makes the decision, right, well, best way to take a bridge, two ends at once. So I'll go across the canal, says to the 2 sergeant, when you hear my grenades go off at the bunker on the other end, you attack at the south end, I'll attack the north end. And that's exactly what they do. And the 5, I think it's about 80 of them, Italian soldiers of the 385th Coastal Defence Battalion, no stomach for a fight, they leg it. And then the sappers from the glider rip out all the cables, etc., rip the dems off the bridge. And the bridge, Ponte Grande, is in the South Stafford's hands. And the scene set then for a massive classic airborne battle through the night and into the next day. Len Withers will get the Military Cross for that. And they fight all through the next day until 15:30 the next day. And in the morning, there's 80 people have gathered around the bridge defending it. And then the Italians increase artillery fire, mortar fire, more heavy weapons, more troops, etc. Till eventually, there's only 15 guys left unwounded and able to fight with ammunition. Some of them escape and evade, some of them surrender. The Italians recapture the bridge, but the sappers have ripped all the dems off it, so they can't blow it. Less than an hour later, 5th Division, the tanks from 5th Division arrive and overrun the bridge and recapture it. So the airborne still done their job, and they come out of all the bushes again and re-occupy the bridge. And even some of the guys have been taken prisoner, overwhelm their guards and take them prisoner. But even Amel's the first coup de main, glider coup de main. But this sets the scene. But nobody talked about this. This is what frustrates me so much, because, if you look at what Grant did, and what the glider crews did, and what 15 Platoon did with minimal training to what follows later.
Talking about things that aren't mentioned much, one thing we haven't mentioned it much either is that there were actually American glider pilots with the GPR guys as well. And some of them actually made it to the bridge, didn't they?
They did, yeah. Sam Fino, 2 or 3 of them, yeah. So these guys, they volunteered to fly. And so they were involved in the training program. And then when it came out that there weren't enough pilots to fly the lift for 1st Airlanding Brigade, they said, we'll go, we'll do it. And they did, and they performed really well. So yeah, and I tried to praise them as much as I could in the book, because they didn't have to do that. They didn't have to do that. They're not trained the same as the British glider pilots. They find themselves at Ponte Grande in a toe-to-toe fight with Italian Marines and whatever. So boys done good.
Yeah. And they are. Is it Chatterton then wants to give them British flying wings?
Yeah, he did, and quite rightly so. And I also think that the troop carrier command guys get a bad press. To do what they did with the training they had and the aircraft they had, the experience they had, the leadership they had was phenomenal. They did the best they possibly could. But afterwards, in the immediate aftermath of the operation, they got all the blame. And a lot of that came from the American glider pilots, because the rule was the glider pilot was the one who cast off, but they would be cast off by the tugs. So it was definitely and Hackett famously gated all the guys and said, so they didn't kill anyone. Well, I think the more information that comes out about it, the more I think you find there's a different aspect to it. As I did some digging the other week, and it was the bombing plan in support of Ladbroke, and there wasn't one. 205 Squadron, who flew Wellington bombers, were supposedly supporting the 1st Airlanding Brigade. And when I think it was Colonel Goldsmith, the guy from 1st Airlanding Brigade, goes to see them as the intelligence liaison guy, says, hey, so what will you be bombing? And we'll be doing this. And they're like, and the RAF concept of what Ladbroke is it's a feint, it's diversion. You really need to do anything. And Jimmy Doolittle, who's the theatre commander for Allied Air Power, says, no, we're not doing that. We've got 4 of the targets to bomb, which are actually being part of the invasion plan, so we need to bomb them. That's the priority, because something had gone wrong. Now, whether that's Hopkinson being all the subterfuge he's doing, or whether it's poor staff work, but the RAF don't understand what Ladbroke is, even though 38 Wing are flying on it, but they're not Bomber Command.
Yeah. What are the lessons learned? And I mean, not the D-Day striping, is something outside of that. What lessons are being learned as a result of?
I think when they get back and have this big hoo-ha afterwards, Chesterton spends that night in the tent with Colonel Dunn, Brigadier Dunn, the guy who's in charge of the troop carrier wing, and they demolish a bottle of bourbon they're getting together. What are we going to do about this? Lost all these guys and it's all gone horribly wrong. And that's when Chesterton gets given this American uniform and a letter saying, get him back as fast as possible by American transport, not a UK transport, not British, so that he can get back to the Air Ministry and the War Office before the news of this really does hit the fan. And that's what he does. He gets back. He's thought about it all the way back. And that's when this thing about we need to co-locate, we need to change our language, we need to think about how they need to train more on gliders, more. So if you think about it, that's what freshman disaster. Okay, we took the bridge, we took the bridge at Fusty, Ponte Grande, but they're not huge successes, are they? They're close runs. Yeah. For what? They're Pyrrhic victories with high casualties. So we need to do better. So if it's going to survive, this is the key point, which is why I wanted to do the Sicily book in the first place, because all the glider pilots I spoke to said that was the moment when we nearly got disbanded. Chesterton gets on that plane and goes back to the UK with the understanding that total soldiers is all very good, and it's good. It's a good core thing, but the glider crews need to be symbiotic with the tug crews. They need to live on the same airfield. They need to train together. They need to live in the same messes. They need to speak the same language. They need to co-locate. So he goes back and stops calling it a battalion, calls it a regiment, calls them wings, calls them squadrons, makes it an aviation unit. Yeah, it's still Army, definitely still Army, but he said, we need to, I think the biggest thing that comes out of that is that, because it's like these stovepipes with the Army, and if you read some of the horror stories at the start in 42 when they're marching to their gliders, standing to attention and getting their glider and flying and not talking to the tug crews, etc. They need to understand the tug crews and vice versa. So I think the biggest thing that comes out of Sicily is that. So I think, for me, if you ask me to choose one thing, that's it.
What were the glider pilots' thoughts of Ladbroke once it was over with? And then what is your assessment? You've studied it. You've written a book about it. What does Mike Peters think?
So when I first started talking to glider pilots about it, which would be about 30 years ago, they were still angry about it. A lot of them, those who were on it, I used to talk to a guy called Jock East a lot. He was quite a bullshit guy anyway. He was never slaying coming forward job, and he's flown every op. So he was one of the royalty of the regiment sort of thing. And he had nothing good to say about Chesterton. He said he pointed the finger squarely at Chesterton for allowing Ladbroke to happen, not at Hopkinson and Woodard. No, it's Chesterton's fault. He signed us up for it. And I think that maybe there's a bit of that because, when you, as you know, in any chain of command, if you make your objection, then people say, no, we're doing it anyway. You say, okay, right, I'll get on with it. Which is what Chesterton did. Those that didn't do Sicily didn't really have an opinion. They just thought, thank God I wasn't on that. Yeah, the guys who did Sicily had a operation. Those that did it, so yeah, I did Sicily. I'm quite emotional about it, about how it shouldn't have happened. In hindsight, I still think there's more to come out about it. I don't think there's any great conspiracy. I think it's, as I said earlier, this learning curve and this thinking about how do you use airborne forces, how do you command and control and coordinate in 1943 across North Africa when you really just got there. You got no telephone exchanges, etc. And you got this brand new capability, and we've all been around brand new capabilities. Everyone wants to use them. It could have been a lot better. It could have been kept a lot simpler. I think both Freshman and Ladbroke are examples of doing things too early. But in wartime, I think you do that. You take the risk or gamble. And there's a difference. And you have to say, Hopkinson, did he gamble on this? Did he take the risk? Or, because you walk those fields now, and most of the injuries to those 80-odd glider pilots so 18 were killed, 80 plus were wounded or missing. 75%, I think, of the wounded guys were broken legs and knees, ankles, knees, and the lower leg, where they've just gone through the wall. The nose of the glider had gone through the wall. The pilot sat in it. And you read the accounts. I found a few of them and put them in there because there were too many to put them all in there. There's loads of guys with broken legs, but ones I put in there are guys who are still left in the wreck the next day. No war. Was it a necessary operation? Maybe they should have done, in hindsight, drop paratroopers there and drop the gliders at Fustian.
We're going to be wrapping the episode up shortly, but I've just got one last thing to talk about. Obviously, the next mass use of gliders is going to be Normandy in 44. You've got two glider pilots who are on Ladbroke, namely, you've already mentioned one of them, Jimmy Woolworth and John Ainsworth.
Yeah.
Pilots of glide number one at Pegasus Bridge. Now, they have very different experiences during Ladbroke, don't they? Can you fill us in on what happened to them?
Yeah, so I always used to tease Jim Woolworth about it because he is the guy who flew the glider through the nose of Pegasus Bridge and lunched on that for all of his life, But when I found all the form Bravos and the post-operational reports for all the gliders, I found his glider. Numbers gone out of my head, but he was dozens of miles away from the bridge. And I just rib him about it. He said, don't tell anybody that. And I said, well, it's not your fault because the tug pilot takes you where he takes you, sort of thing, And Ainsworth swims ashore, doesn't he? I think. Is that right? I think he swims ashore and uses his knife and all that. It's just, it is the embodiment of the total soldier when you read his citation. Ainsworth was the hero of mine because he was recommended for the military medal. And that was still in the days when soldiers got medals and officers got crosses. So that's how you tell the difference. And his citation really, for me, when I found it, encapsulated the spirit of the Glider Pilot Regiment as it was meant to be. So it says here, the staff sergeant was forced to land his aircraft far out in the sea when attacking Sicily. Having seen that his crew were provided with life-saving jackets and all had been extricated from the waterlogged part of the glider, he swam ashore 3 miles distant. With nothing but a fighting knife, he killed 2 sentries, and with the rifle of the second, continued fighting throughout the battle. The leadership and courage of the staff sergeant pilot was in the best traditions of the service. Yeah, I mean, not just the glider to the 1st Airlanding Brigade did that night. And we talked earlier about the SRS and Paddy Rain, and they joined in with them, didn't they, and all that kind of stuff. So, but Ainsworth, so we picked up a few people with him. We talked about Big Grant, Peter Wilkinson from the 38 with the 2 RAF guys who were involved. We talked about Jim Woolworth, Ainsworth, Galpin, Brown. These are all, and it's interesting, I think on the 1st of July, when they all get given their orders, the CO of the Borders has a battalion parade and says to everybody, this is bound to go wrong. It's an airborne operation. This will all come down to junior leaders and everyone at the lowest level doing what they're supposed to do and understanding what they're supposed to do. And I'm asking you all to do that.
Well, I can't think of a better way to bring the episode to a close. As usual, we could sit here and talk for hours. I don't know about you, Kev.
Mike, I can't thank you enough. Andy and I have always said this thing just didn't happen.
No.
It didn't just hatch. It had to grow. It had to have successes and it had to have failures. And your glider pilots in Sicily is just such a superb example of showing us where they were at that time in 1943.
Yeah, and what I came to realize over the years was we built these guys up on a pedestal. They weren't on that pedestal at the start. They had to get from the ground to the pedestal, and they didn't want to be on the pedestal anyway. But when you listen to between the lines, what was actually going on, it wasn't as glamorous as we think. They weren't flying all the time, what sort of. So reality was very much different.
It just remains for me to say thanks ever so much, Mike, for joining us once again. We haven't seen the last of you. There's plenty more to come. Thanks again to all our listeners for tuning in. You'll hear us on the next one. So all it remains to say is time, gentlemen, please, or another episode of Ham and Jam. Gents, raise your glass. Cheers.
Cheers.
Ham and Jam.
Ham and Jam.
Ham and Jam.
Thanks for listening to Ham and Jam. If you enjoyed this episode and want to help Andy and Kevin make more, please support us on buymeacoffee.com.
Well, we just lost Andy. You still there, Andy?